All right, we're going live.
How long?
There's nobody on. Go ahead and ask the question. Go ahead. How long? What?
Oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's nobody on. You might as well ask the question.
Oh,
so one person looking now, so it's good. Go ahead.
How long do you need us to speak for?
Just start out at the beginning, just a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
and then we will go from there. That was great. You were like, oh, what? You know what? I was thinking I didn't give. This would have been a great group to play Black Love with, Black Joy with.
Oh.
You guys are your audio is. Am I the only one that's having trouble hearing you guys?
You can't hear us at all?
No, I can hear you, but it's like staticky and stuff, and it's not on.
Yeah, I hear static too, but they said they didn't hear it.
Oh, I don't hear it.
I don't hear it.
I wonder why that is. Okay, so hi, Dr. Earl Lewis. She's commenting and saying, because I said there's only one person here. She said Dr. Earl Lewis is very much somebody. Okay, hi. Over there in the comments. Thank you everyone for coming. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade. I am a licensed psychologist. I'm an executive director at a Healing Paradigm here in Atlanta. And I have the pleasure of welcoming my sister colleagues from all different kinds of fields today so we can have this conversation. Hey, my sister Jamie is on saying hello. What's up, y'all? Say hello, give us some energy, let us know that you are here.
Hello.
I want to start out, hey, definitely be in that chat and, just feed us some energy because that's how we do it. So we're doing the Sister Cipher this morning. We want to feel your energy as we have this conversation about Lovecraft Country and looking specifically at this idea of magic. Let me just confess something. I told this to Thandi on Wednesday. I didn't watch the whole series because I'm a scaredy cat. That is not me. I didn't see the whole series.
You didn't want to watch the series.
No, I did as much as I could.
Let's go there.
So I did 5.5 episodes, and I listened to the whole podcast. So I need credit for that, okay? So I will speak in that realm that I can speak in. Hey, Victorine.
Okay.
I got my sister Victorine is saying hi from France. So hey, over there in Panama. I want to just bring my sisters into this conversation. I've been really intrigued at the concept of magic that was throughout the whole Lovecraft Country series, and from beginning to end is this concept of magic. And I've been thinking about this for the last several years for myself, because when I think about magic, particularly as I was growing up, I thought about magic from the perspective of you go to a birthday party and you see a magician doing tricks or other kinds of things that aren't real. And as I got older and I started to understand African spirituality, what I began to understand that what Europeans were calling magic was what our ancestors knew was just everyday life and how we showed up as spiritual beings. And so I want us to jump into this conversation today. And what better way to have this conversation than with a group of sisters that are at the intellectual peak. They are my, if I call myself a knife, they are the sharpeners of my knife. And so I want to start this conversation with my sister. Well, actually, let me introduce everybody first. So I'm just going to go around. At the top of my screen, I have my sister Nozibele Waithe. She is an anthropologist and the owner of Grand Tresses. So you see that hair, it's looking out fly, looking better than mine. That's because she do the hair thing all day long. And then next to her is my sister, Reverend Estee, Nena, Mawasi, Okunsade, Dillard. And she is a queer sexologist and gonna bring that whole part of looking at stuff from a spiritual perspective, looking at the Christian perspective, but then also bringing that African spirituality in. And then I got my sister all the way in California and woke up to have this conversation with us. Over there, that is my sister Thandisizwe Chimurenga, and Thandi is a journalist. She's an author. She's a social commentator, and she lights the fire under folks. So thank you for having that fire and bringing it to us this morning. And then I also have my sister over here in Atlanta, Professor Dr. CorrieClaiborne. She is a professor of literature and specifically focuses on African-American literature and is associate professor at Morehouse College. So thank you, ladies, for coming this morning. I want to start out by having you, Nozibele, jump in. So from an anthropology perspective, kind of jump in and give us, from the anthropological perspective, talk about magic. How does that show up for people of African descent?
Okay, so when you think about magic, you have to look at how the term was originally introduced. If we look at the Greek origins of the word, it was specifically developed to talk about the Greeks' interactions with the Persians and any type of foreign practice that they thought was, kind of unique and bizarre. So with that basic understanding of magic, it later evolves into what anthropologists how they started to perceive magic. So some of the earliest people that talked about magic was Henry Louis Morgan and Edward Burnett Taylor. So they took kind of like an evolutionist approach because that's when anthropology was just coming on and it was new. So they were trying to make anthropology more of a hard science. So they start comparing the way that people develop culturally to the way that people develop biologically, right? So you have Henry Louis Morgan, and he said that you have these 3 levels of civilization. You have savagery, barbarism, and then civilization. So they kind of like conscribed that section of magic to savagery and later barbarism. And the other anthropologists like E.B. Burnett Taylor talked about the way that religion developed in terms of animism, polytheism, and then monotheism, with monotheism being the highest form as well. So now we start to see how they're starting to relegate magic, right? So magic is in the realm of people who are savages, people who practice animism, people who are not civilized, and something that's opposed to science. They never really quite look at the science behind magic, because magic, there is a science. When you look at it, is for African people, magic is a way that they deal with the environment, that they've observed the environment over time. And because they have such a close connection, and not just African people, but people of color, because they have an intimate connection with the earth and their surroundings, they can understand, magic. So it is a science behind it. But, for a while, anthropologists just kind of like treated it as something that is for savages and people who don't have education. And because of that, that's how magic comes across to us. It's this nebulous, fake thing that isn't grounded in anything, only in fear and superstition.
Interesting. And you see my face when you were saying that, right? I'm like, all right, And let me bring 2 of our colleagues in. I want to bring in Dr. Kenja McCray. She's an associate professor of history at Atlanta Metropolitan College. And Dr. McCray, thank you for coming today. I'm hoping that you can kind of talk about this idea of magic from a historical perspective, thinking about this. So I'm thinking about it in 2 ways. 1, because you're a historian and you always get me right from a historical perspective. And 2, because you always remind me you from Alabama. So from those 2 things, talk about magic. Where do we see magic in terms of history as it relates to people of African descent?
So in the literature, we know that we see magic being discussed as a holdover, an African holdover, so a belief in magic. So I do agree with Professor Waithe in that often early on it was portrayed as something that was nebulous and spooky. But as time went on, more particularly after anthropologists say explored the African past as something that legitimately the birthright of African Americans, we had more people to discuss African holdovers and beliefs in what people would call magic or superstition. Drums and Shadows would be an interesting book to explore. But then there are later, more recent, let's just say, books like Michael Gomez's Exchanging Our Country Marks, or even Jason Young's book on Congo holdovers in the African American community, where people discuss things like a powder that you can put around your door to keep away enemies and things like that, that we would, from a Western perspective, consider magic. So those are a couple of things. I know we have a lot of panelists and I didn't want to take up too much time, but those are a couple of perspectives we can use to look at it. But from my perspective as a historian, in thinking about these terms like Black girl magic, I would also want to underscore that there are multiple ways of looking at and using, putting the term magic into use. So from one perspective, it's something that's nebulous, something that's spooky, something that is supernatural, right? That people are employing to help them in this realm. But from another perspective, it is magic is used to refer to ways that we interact with each other, ways that we employ our talents that are often hidden from the mainstream. And they're hidden for various reasons, including that we have been invisibilized. So people don't recognize or see the work we're doing, such as working together, right, in unity to make something happen. So that's my take on it. At least two ways to look at magic. Supernatural, but then real world stuff we do that could be hidden from the mainstream.
Okay. And that makes me want to bring in Dr. CorrieClaiborne, who's the Associate Professor of Literature at Morehouse College. Dr. Claiborne, talk about this in literature, because I know growing up, I did engage in, when you read Black literature, there's always this theme of magic. And so I wasn't super surprised to see it in Lovecraft country, but just kind of talk about that from a literature perspective of magic showing up.
And I think that this is a good segue, because I think what you're calling magic, some people might not recognize as magic, but we're talking about root work, just any kind of midwifery, right? Like any kind of healing practice, any kind of learning practice. And a lot of times, especially in like the Alabama, Mississippi, sort of the Delta area, what they call hoodoo show up. There's like in the blues and all these other kind of iterations. But one of the things just thinking about literature is, if you ever read the stories of Charles Chesnutt, who wrote around the turn of the century, he had these things called the conjure tales, right? Like, and at the center of it, I think people they think it's really funny. It's like an Uncle Remus main sort of like called Uncle Julius. But the conjure tales, he did research, right? Like he went in the fields of North Carolina and kind of sort of understood, like, what are some of the spiritual practices. So all of that is magic. Magic for them means the way you get over. So most people know most famously the way Zora Neale Hurston talks about it. But if you go back in slave narratives and like any musical art form, any other kind of art form, there is a sort of a literary and creative presence of magic, right? And a lot of people, surprisingly enough, link that back to the Bible, because if you go, they used to have these little booklets, like you could cast that, like use the Bible to pick numbers, a lot of use the Bible to do all this kind of stuff, but they really saw, Jesus, he could walk on water, he raised people from the dead, he could touch things. They understood the power of the word, from the Bible too, because you could speak things into existence. And I know all of us have that kind of grandmother. That was our magic. We just say something. You have to be very careful with the words because you could speak something up on people. So I think our what we call magic, a lot of other people would just say, well, that's what my grandmother did. That's, you know, these from these other kind of stories. So it is important to recognize that all of those sort of vernacular practices are also magic, I think. So.
And I think that's the point, is because I grew up in this world where those things where like you wonder who cooked what. And it wasn't just about the food. It's like, I don't eat that person food. When you go over there, don't eat nothing. And there were these things, yeah, like my grandmama would be like, you know, you do something crazy, my grandma, she's like, all right. She wouldn't say nothing else. And then people start getting scared. So there was this way that was just part of being a person of African descent. And I didn't call that magic. No one ever said that word, but it was just the way that we showed up in the world. You brought up the Bible, and so that makes me want to come to Reverend Dillard. I called you earlier this week, and so I was like, well, wait a minute, is there magic in the Bible? Now, I know some of y'all are going to get mad at me, but I just had to ask this question. So talk to me about that. Where's magic showing up in terms of Christian theology in the Bible?
So Christian theology has magic all throughout. And I think it's as much this anthropological conversation as it is a Christian conversation, because it's important to understand how things are being interpreted and why we see them the way we see them. So it's like, you know, the most famous story that we have amongst us that's a narrative that goes across spiritual disciplines and traditions is the story of Moses. Everybody keeps the story of Moses. Even if we put Jesus down, we keep Moses. Well, the Red Sea gets parted by a staff that Moses turns into a snake. You know what I'm saying? Like, so in order for us to navigate these stories, there are always these magical elements. The point, right, is what's the efficacy of what we're doing with our spiritual energy and our spiritual power. And the crux of what the Christian story and narrative and tradition is about moving spiritual power. So it's absolutely there. The challenge, though, with the larger Christian narrative outside of more progressive iterations, womanist theology, where I concentrate my own academic work, you know, is the interpretation. So there are words where if you wanted to point to it in the Bible, where it says, don't consult with magicians, don't consult with sorcerers, like those actual words are there. Now there's a translation issue, right? But it's also about how we read what the words say in the biblical text, because that can't be separated from slave Bibles, that can't be separated from slave religion, that can't be separated from how we have a legacy of interpretation from the pulpit that informs what we see in the text and how we understand it. So I do think in the Christian tradition, how we interpret magic and the ways that we talk about it create a dissonance that for me as a child was the place where my own kind of biblical radicalism came from, because I'm like, it's New Year's Eve and can't nobody walk through the front door but a man, but we trying to ask Jesus. I'm confused, right? What do these two like? You are absolutely not about to sweep in this house. You're not washing clothes, right? We're not doing any of these things. And also, you know, we have a problem with the idea of using magic or using herbs. So we also we have to talk about both things at the same time. For those of us who are trying to undo some of that harm that has happened in the larger narrative, it's important to reinterpret it. So there's herbs in the Bible. There's the use of herbs. Jesus does a miracle by spitting on the earth and making a blind man see. That's the use of literal earth and his his own spit, right? So this power of your own ashe. What's happening? We see this in Lovecraft country, the power of the blood, right? So if Jesus's blood has power, our ancestors' blood has power. We see the power of the whole culmination and climax of the series is about getting Tick's blood, right? And yet we have a belief in the power of blood, yet over time have been taught to exorcise our own interpretation of the power of our own blood. So it's about the reconciling of those theological matters that we have to do.
Wow. So somebody just asked here, Patricia asked, and I throw this question out to you, Estee, Reverend Estee, is that how do you differentiate magic from a miracle in the Bible?
I absolutely don't differentiate. Miracles are magic.
There.
In fact, that was when I was preparing for this morning in my meditation time. I was like, if I have to have a takeaway, my sentence is miracles are magic. What Jesus is doing has a science to it, much like hoodoo has a science to it, much like Ifa has a science, right? Mm-hmm. So if you go to the church women and ask for intercessory prayer, there's a science to it. These women are not invoking spiritual energy and spiritual power without precision. So we aren't doing this without care, without intention, without training. All of these things are also a part of what it means to be African descended people. And the magic, the power, the efficacy of it is absolutely miraculous. But it's also miraculous that we have the ability to pray our way out of slavery. That was miraculous. And we did that in a hush harbor, which was a theological sacred space. Right. So it's the same thing happening in the biblical text. If we go back to that same Exodus narrative, the miracle of it was the plagues. The miracle of it was the rebellion. The miracle of it was Moses doing the work to separate them from and them being able to cross the water. So it's being able to understand that the miraculous happens because of the science, the intention, the energy, and the magic that's in it.
Mm. So you actually made me think. So we're going to go to our social commentator over here, Sister Thandi. And when you said that, I think that when we think about magic, and so you're talking about stuff like that's positive that happens. And sometimes when there's the other side, there's always a balance, with magic. And so sometimes the magic is you can have a sociopath that's running a country. And then something comes to show like, oh, no, we're going to stop this and shut everything down. But let's go to Sister Thandi.
Well, yeah, there's always a balance. You need to have balance. And just because negativity happens, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an imbalance. The whole show ends with white people's magic being taken away. White people have magic and they work in their magic. And one of the things that we had a Facebook discussion on early on when Lovecraft Country was coming on. In most cultures, you have the figure of Ogun, which takes on a variety of names, right? But there's always this area where that deals with iron, that deals with that which is hard, that deals with containment, the police, the prisons, execution of animals, right? The executioner, the one that takes the iron, that forges it into the knife, the blade for the hunt, etc. And so in this country, in this society, that function comes under police, right? The Ogun is represented by the police. And if you are a practitioner of Ifa or any of our spiritual traditions, you know that for the most part, the male deities are fed male animals, right? The female deities are fed female animals. In other words, they're replenished, they're nourished with the energy of females, of males. And so when we see that the majority of Black men are being murdered in this country, the majority of Black men are being murdered by police with impunity, that's male energy that is going to replenish this society. Is it not? I didn't say Black women weren't being assassinated, weren't being murdered. We get that also, right? Every now and then, Ifa practitioners, every now and then they'll take a female, right? Every now and then they'll take a hen. Every now and then, right? But
you blew my mind. Oh, you know.
You got Thor, you got Odin, right? For the most part, this is male, and this is the energy of the males that is being used to replenish a wicked, anti-Black, white supremacist society.
Wow.
Now, I can't say that to everybody. I feel like I can say that to y'all, and I'm okay. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so let me jump in.
It's only a few people I can say that to.
as you say it on Facebook Live. Okay, Sister Tanya, I know Dr. McCray has to go. Dr. McCray, you want to leave us with any last thoughts or comments? She just blew me away with that comment right there.
One thing I did want to say, and hopefully I can come back and listen to the rest of you all's discussion after my next engagement, but I do want to take care that while we are reading a lot in terms of the influence of Ifa, of Vodun on magic in the African American communities, right? And then reading that onto Lovecraft Country. In Lovecraft Country itself, there was, I think, a hint that these African and African-derived perspectives, ideologies, religious points of view, or religious practices could be folded into the concept of magic. I would say it wasn't done so well, so carefully. We had Professor Waithe and I had a conversation with another professor at Atlanta Metropolitan State College about Lovecraft Country and Afrofuturism and the like. And the other Professor Naja Young brought that up. That was her critique. Look, this is not done well. You don't, as has been already said on this panel. Mm-hmm. There's a science to it. Mm-hmm. There are rules and regulations, and there's an art and craft to it. And so you don't just have the random practitioner show up and do something that's a little Ifa and something that's a little Vodun and something that's a little hoodoo, but there is essentially what would amount to a clergy, right? And there are particular members of the clergy that you call upon to do certain rituals. So I think we should be clear that while we see the magic in the Lovecraft Country's discussion of magic, there is room for improvement, because I think they could do a lot more in terms of really doing the research and showing those approaches to using the supernatural, using what we don't see, what we don't necessarily see and smell and feel, sense, right, on a practical level to shift
Kendra,
the world and change the world.
That's almost you done tossed out a little bomb, and now you got to run. I got to holler at you about this right here.
Like, whoa! And all right, I'm out.
And she dropped the mic.
Come back. But if you have to leave, you have to leave. I understand. But I interviewed an Akan priest a few years ago, and he poured libation before the interview. I said, okay, no problem, understand. And then when I talked to him later, he said, well, if you use the interview, you're going to have to cut out the libation part. I said, I am? He said, because if I'm reciting those words, you're going to have to pour libation every time you play that. I was like, okay. And so when I hear that, no, it wasn't necessarily presented the way it would be done in a ritualistic way through Lovecraft Country. But at the same time, is that what we want? I'm listening to the words that they're saying. I'm like, I don't know if I really want them to call on Oya. I'm glad they gave a nod by saying the word, but are they ready to call Oya on this set? And it's like, one of the things we said a few years ago, stop giving white folks the recipe to the macaroni and cheese. Stop giving them, stop trying to save them from themselves. Let them go ahead on and use craft. It's okay. We know the deal.
And raisins.
Let them keep the raisins in the potato salad and the macaroni. It's all good.
Oh my God.
Okay. But the book was also written by a white man, which I think we have to really, whenever we do stuff, I understand the Black showrunners and whatever added a lot, but they were starting with, I think, a vision that was not as complete as what you're offering here. He did not do any research about African traditional religion.
No, he did not.
He did not do. So they tried to add, even though why the woman had an Ethiopian outfit on, I don't even know. But they tried to add like all this other stuff in, I think, at the time to kind of give it context.
That's what I'm
saying.
But
it was starting with a very incomplete.
But we're making
but I think that's where it's hindered a lot. But that's where it's hindered a lot, because it starts with, you know, a document, you know, that had its limits. So they were trying to expand it, but when you start from there, that sometimes you don't have anywhere else to go. So I felt like they kind of were throwing stuff in and trying to make it more relevant while not actually calling on anybody, right? Like while not actually doing the ritual, but just saying we're going to recognize. But they also didn't ever use African magic, right? Like they never went to a source where they were like, let me go. If you were Black in Chicago, you were not going to go and ask white people for nothing about that was magical. You weren't going to ask them for no book. You would ask them for whatever. So I felt like they didn't give the source of healers and all these people who have been probably in their community, numbers runners, all these people who claim to have kind of, you know, rituals and whatever. They didn't ask none of those people. So I felt like that was one of the things that kind of frustrated me about the series.
Well, and I think there could be a balance here, and I know you want to go Nozibele. I think there could be a balance of looking at both. Is that, yes, it's problematic, and I did hear that talk that you, Professor McCray, and Professor Waithe did. Yes, you know, calling on Oya and then having kind of just random woman, you know, in here calling like random spirits. That's not it. But then I can see the other side of that is like, you don't need to be giving them everything, but at least it wasn't approached from a negative perspective. So for me, if I can't give anything else, I would say, now I'm not talking about that Christina chick, but I'm saying,
I'm talking about what happens to that healer at the end of that episode. So you can say it's not negative. I thought it was kind of negative, but.
Yeah, I thought that part was tricky too.
Well, I didn't see the end, so then I'm missing something.
Okay, so at the end of the ceremony, the priest is possessed by the negative spirit. So I think what that speaks to my earlier point about precision and training and lineage, right? So I think that's the part that makes that ceremony tricky, among the other things that I saw at least 4 traditions that didn't include what the garb was. And I think for me, I think yes, mystery is as much a part of magic, and it's important as the other components. That's part of the power of it. It cannot be held by everyone in all of its iterations. Absolutely. And you know, the kind of idea of like, we just walked on this porch and we not gonna say nothing, we not gonna do nothing, we not gonna invoke nobody, we just going to
girl, I was like, what?
Take the sacrifice. You know, so, and then at the end, yes, so the priest is taken on by the spirit. So for me, also that problematized this nod to it not being without lineage and precision and training, and you know, like a priest is not going to have that kind of trouble or that kind of experience.
Correct.
So what I think about when I look at Lovecraft Country, right? Because based on looking at it as an anthropological perspective, I look at it as reading as a text, right? So when you're looking at Lovecraft Country, for me, I'm not looking at it for things that are specific. I'm looking at it and reading it as a text. So what I mean by that is a lot of it is metaphor. So if you look at, you know, like Thandi was saying earlier about African-American males being sacrificed, you can look at that first episode, Whitey's on the Moon, with them trying to sacrifice Tick so that the white people can get so the white people can get power as a way of African men, just like Thandi says, African men having to sacrifice themselves so that white men can survive. You can look at the Meet Me and Dagu instance where the Asian woman had childhood trauma. She was molested as a child. So she has this monster growing inside of her that, you know, kind of like consumes her through her life. So when I look at it, I look at the whole of the H-Craft Love series that they did on HBO, which is different from the book and is different from what the H-Craft author wrote. It has nothing to do with him other than just having his name in the title. I look at it as the different types of violence that's impacted upon people of color's bodies. So even that episode with the Holy Ghost, we can talk about the lady having 5 or 6 different types of African garb on. But at the crux of that episode is the historical violence that has been done against Black bodies through medical examination. That's what that episode was about. That was the Black magic and the evil magic and the science that was impacted upon us that we have to think about. So when we talk about magic and the magic in H-Craft Love, you know, Lovecraft country, I'm looking at it as a metaphor for our experience as African people here in the United States.
And you bring up a good point.
Just one quick note. So there's 2 white authors, H.P. Lovecraft, right, who wrote at the turn of the century, who is the science fiction writer who made up the monsters, etc., who's very racist, right? Like, so there's that person. But then there's Matt Ruff, who wrote the book Lovecraft Country, by which the series is based on. So while I'm not talking about H.P. Lovecraft, who everybody knows was calling Black people all kind of N-words, I'm talking about the Matt Ruff, who wrote the book in 2016, and what he sort of included that then went on to be the show that they made. Make it clear.
See, that's why you gotta have folks from different fields, because we gotta just keep each other straight.
I'll wait for you, sis. I'll wait.
No. Go ahead.
So one of the things that I was hoping, we would at least mention was the fact that the not so much the tension, but the way that the church was held with African spirits, because Letty is going to the church praying to Father God for protection. Then she hands the film over to Christina. It is Letty who makes the move to get baptized and get Tick baptized, and they are baptized. But Letty is the one who is chanting in that basement, making those experimented on Africans whole again. She tells them, "You are not dead. Come help me get this devil up out of this house." And they come, right? Letty is the one who leads the chants, because she's carrying Tick's child, it falls to her. And so she's the one who the ancestor Nana Hattie explains everything to. And it is she who leads the chanting.
Hannah.
No, not Hannah. Hattie, Regina Taylor's character.
Okay.
And so she is the one who leads the chant in that circle when they call back, is it Hiram or the other guy, to finally banish his spirit. And it's Letty at the very end who is chanting and bringing down the walls on Christina. So even though there's this recognition of the church, that's not where the power is. That's not where the magic is. Letty understands what she has to do.
I actually really like Letty's struggle, because there's a point after Montrose kills the two-spirit person, native person who's helping them with interpreting the language, where she's like, "This is too much. This is demonic. This is not of God. This magic is not. It's problematic. We have to stop, because we're hurting too many people." So I think Letty's struggle throughout the narrative is really indicative, right, of our own ancestral connections and our belief in the power, but this cognitive dissonance that we exist in, particularly in America, for Black folks struggling around what we know God can do and what we've seen our grandmama do that works. And what is it that we do with that liminal space that we really live in and from, of having these tools And then knowing that there are other tools that we can access, the fear of it, the
fear,
strain of it, but also the spiritual impetus of it, which is what you just spoke to. Once she's pregnant, this shift of responsibility of there's a power here that I cannot be irresponsible about. And I think when we have those kinds of connections, particularly in our own DNA lineages, we see a different honor and regard for, okay, I go to church, but my folks go to Geechee, and right, because there's a different connection to that ancestral responsibility. So we have to be able to leave space for folks who are at all points of that matrix, really, because all of this interplay informs how we see and experience these things.
I saw a comment earlier. Brother Johnny said, Johnny, he was saying, when do we begin to call this a science? Because we've said it several times that there's a science here. And there's several of us that are on this call that are initiated, and we know that there is a very specific science. And so when you're talking about, like I said, I watched half of 3 and then I couldn't do it no more. And then at the end, when you're saying, so if you're talking about a priest that's taking on a negative spirit, or as someone that's coming and doing spirit work, then I know that they haven't, either they're not initiated or they're not appropriately trained, that something is happening. Because just like I couldn't go, because I am not a Christian, I am not a minister, I am not been ordained, I couldn't get up in nobody's pulpit and start talking and delivering a sermon. So why should we do the same thing? Without permission. Without permission.
Yeah, you could. That's the problem. You can. The problem is they can just get up and start saying stuff.
Girl, what you say?
Not from a legitimate perspective. So you can talk about the folks that are doing that. But what we know is that this is a science. So I'm not a chemist. I am not going to take a chemistry set and then start messing around in that, because I know that's a real science and somebody can get hurt. And so we have to be able to understand and think about African spirituality. So when we change the language and stop calling it magic, and we talk about it in terms of our indigenous traditional spiritual systems, the systems that our ancestors used to go to battle to be able to save ourselves. When we begin to understand that, then we recognize that there's a science and everybody can't do it. And you can't just mix all kinds of things. And I've had to be able to walk through that when I do certain things. So there's a period of time where I would do ancestral meditations, and I would do them online with folks. And there's a very specific way that I would call a particular energy, but I also knew how to dissipate that energy. That's because I've been initiated for over 20 years. Now, I would very specifically say to people, that ain't something that you need to be doing, because you don't know who you calling.
So if you have
who you calling, how long they gonna stay, where they came from, what they bringing with them, what they gonna leave behind.
But if you have a cable show that's being viewed by millions of people, maybe you need to wear a different type of guard, and maybe you need to change the prayer that you say. Maybe you need to do that so that you don't have X number of million people out here who don't know what they're doing.
You do, but I think, back to, whether it's metaphorical, which it is. I mean, of course, it's a book. I mean, the Bible is metaphorical, right? It's like not literal, right?
You're going to get in trouble. You're going to get in trouble for that.
That literally is what it is. It's an anthology. It was collected over 900 years. It doesn't have a single author, all of that stuff, right? Same thing. And it's got a bunch of stories in it. So I think that the question becomes, what did you say, Estee?
I said, as a text of literature, yes.
As a text of literature, right? You can have belief behind it. So that's what I always tell students. If we ever teach the Bible as literature, I was like, I'm not talking about belief. We are just looking at the stories, right? Parables, right? Tales. This kind of idea of a narrative that goes through, and how you hang a narrative together over 900 years. That's what we're talking about. So you can believe it or not. That's not my has nothing to do with me. We're just talking about what it does. And I think that what this work does However, I think leave us with the sense that Black people's magic is not as powerful as white people's magic. And I think that's unfortunate. So by the time I get to the end, yeah, they take the magic from white people, but we never had to take magic from white people. Like, if anything, white people, of course, took magic from us, but we've always kept our own sort of string. And I think what I don't want for us to feel like, oh, if we don't tap into some book that we got to get, that we don't have the knowledge in our own way about magic, right? So Estee, you want to?
I want to jump in.
ahead.
But I saw that. Okay. So I actually want to contest that. I don't know that I think we're looking for white people's magic in Lovecraft country, and let me tell you why. Because of the two-spirit indigenous person. Obviously, because of their ability to interpret and their ability to communicate with Tik, even non-verbally, right? Which is another magical, mysterious thing. They're having telepathic conversations. But the two-spirit individual is an indigenous person with these symbols that we see in other places in the story on their person, right? So the other thing that the two-spirit person brings up for me is that they embody the Adam. So in the biblical text, yes, in the early biblical text, there's a lot of ancient Near Eastern narratives there, right? So epics and all kinds of things are there. There are several creation stories. The first creation story that's prioritized, that's listed, actually talks about the creator God making an Adam, which would be a being that holds both male and female properties, which is what we see embodied in that person. That's where they got magic from, right? So for me, there's a connection there because we know Titus has been stealing it. We know Titus has been enslaving folks. We know Titus has been manipulating people, all these kinds of things. So while I think it's laid onto this white narrative because of the sons of Adam, from some interpretation, it does still seem to point to indigenous spiritual practices as the original source. And I think the connection that Tik automatically has with this original indigenous source further reveals that that's where the magic is, which is why Tik is so much more powerful than what these white people are playing with.
But they all end up dead. So my thing is, look how easily the two-spirit character is killed, right? I was like, she can't even get, they can't even get a whole episode, right? Like, I think on some level, we know from the beginning, that's what, like I said, like slave narratives, we know what's going to happen at the beginning of Lovecraft country. That we don't have to get to the end. We know Tik's gonna die because they tell us at the end, right? Like they tell us at the beginning, rather. They tell us that this is gonna happen. Just like you know what's gonna happen, kind of, you read a biblical story. You kind of you see where we are, right? You know what's gonna happen, right? On some level. But I think that there is this question about how quickly, of course, Tik goes through the whole thing, but how quickly we get over the arc. And what I had a problem with that character, again, is that the way in which they were quickly disposed. They came in to be a representative of this type of knowledge, but they didn't have any kind of strength to me as a character, right? Like, because I feel like, and that's the problem sort of with native understandings anyway, we act like they all did, so they're kind of insignificant. They come in as a image of something, but they don't actually get to enact and show how they impart knowledge and how they pass this down through generations, which they have, right? It sort of stops. And I think the same thing for us. Like, we didn't get a sense of how knowledge between Black people have been passed down through generations, through your grandmother, through all this. One of the best, if you remember Daughters of the Dust, right? Like right at the beginning, it's Nena, they're getting ready to go to the, over the water to the mainland. And she makes what they call a hand, right? A hand is basically like a talisman that is, a lot of times it's got a Bible, got a piece of hair. I don't know the recipe. I just know you just make this kind of thing and you put like a family, it's like you keep your family memory in there, but it is a talisman that protects you, right, against whatever these white people are going to do with you. So she gives it to the family as they're going to go over to the mainland, because she's like, you're going to need this. You need to carry these memories inside of me, right? Like, you need to take this and carry it with you. And my thing is, we have forgotten that. Like, I can tell people, like, that's magic, right? Like that little book, that hand that she makes, that is old past. It's intertwined with Christian stuff. It's whatever. But I can ask these little students I got any, now it's like, did your grandmother give you a talisman? Did she make you a hand? They were like, what? What you talk about? Like, and that's what I'm saying. We have lost, but we can go to, let's talk about Harry Potter. Let's talk about how these white people have magic. That's what I mean. Like, how do we equalize those things?
I just want to say something, because I really dislike when we speak in absolutes. African people have not lost their magic. It may have come to us in different forms. We may not recognize it. There are cultural continuities, like Sterling Stuckey talks about all the time, like, the book that Dr. McCray mentioned earlier, Exchanging Our Country Marks, that we have in our family. And I think the problem is, again, speaking from an anthropological perspective, it's the language that we use. Because we use the language of the oppressors, we have to try to fit how we see the world as African people with this language that really is not effective. So because the same hand that you're talking about, they have the hand of Ifa, they have the hand in voodoo. So they have these things all over. So when I looked at Lovecraft Country, I didn't necessarily see magic that I can identify, because understanding as an African person that magic isn't something different from who I am. Magic is not an abstraction that's away from my body. Like, Reverend Dillard said earlier, it's the fact that we know that on New Year's Day, can't nobody go out until a man come over. That's just something that happens. That's just something that you do. You can't wash clothes. I need to get with you because we must be kin. You can't wash clothes. You can't do any of those things. It's just how you live your life. If you have problems, you go to your grandmother. Your grandmother has something for it. So when we talk about magic and when we look at it, we have to remember that just by the essence that we survived as African people, we damn magical. If you look at all of the stuff that we have happened to us, we are magical. So when I look at Lovecraft Country, I know that doesn't have anything to do with me, because that's white people stuff right there. Because the fact that it's individualized, as an African person, you know that you are not separate from your family and from your people. The fact that it's individualized, the fact that it is specific, the fact that it's needed and is being used for individual and personal gain. I know this is fantasy. I know this is just the stuff that they're doing. So I'm not going to impart what voodoo or Eve or Ifa or Akan tells me about what's magical and special, because there's just more white people nonsense. And I think that is the thing that we need to understand more than anything, is the difference between Black power. You can call it magic, you can call it science, you can call it voodoo, you can call it Akan, you can call it whatever. It's Black people power that we need to make sure that we tap into, access, and recognize, and divorce from all that other noise that's keeping us away from the things that we need to do.
That's an excellent point. And I say to that. So I think that, so let's go around. Let's kind of wrap this up by talking specifically about the everyday things that we do in terms of magic. I'm going to say prayer, meditation, chanting, or saying proverbs. I saw somebody earlier say the use of Psalms for our Christian brothers and sisters, baths, lighting candles. Go. What else? What else do we do?
Pour out a little liquor.
Pouring out a little liquor, pouring libation.
You said our connection with the earth. So herbs, earthwork, crystals, right? Crystals were not just something that we found in the ground. We used them. Our ancestors used them. And so that's not white people stuff anyway. That was ours.
Okay. What else? And y'all online too. Put some stuff in the chat. What else?
Right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right. So cleaning. So I've talked about this too.
Yeah.
The practice of sweep, like, growing up in South Carolina, my grandmother, my great grandmother used to make me sweep dirt. I'm like, it's dirt. Like, this is what it's not supposed to be. Why am I sweeping?
I had to sweep dirt. I had to sweep dirt. All the dirt sweep us.
I had to sweep the dirt in the yard.
What?
In a line.
It was like you gotta make the lines.
Gotta make them lines.
And I realized it wasn't necessarily about cleaning. It was about being in line with the universe. It was about making sure good can come to your door. It's about understanding patterns. It's also about understanding, like they always say, evil travels in straight lines. There is something to be said by making them travel a circuitous route. Like I found all this other kind of stuff out, and it went into going inside the house. So I learned that cleaning, you go in corners, you clap, you sing,
You got to do the corners.
you sing energies out of corners. So whether or not you have a sage or not, or whether or not you got crystals or not, like you're very intentional with the way you clean your house, all that other kind of stuff. And I think that really sort of the kind of understanding of how you do a process, right? Like, so, which I think is a very much magic, is that, one of my favorite books, which I don't have here, is Talking to the Dead by LaRhonda Manigault. And she talks about you have to talk to your ancestors before you make a basket. You talk to your ancestors before you make a quilt. Like everything is guided, right? Like you might not think of that as magic, but that is kind of what they're saying. You speak stuff, you ask stuff, you get sort of confirmation. And you could do a spell for that, right? Or you could just simply say, well, what am I supposed to make, right? Like, how is this supposed to happen? What is it I'm supposed to do, right? So and I think is the essence, yeah.
Yeah, I think the point that I would say to that succinctly is just lineage matters. So it's magical to sit at your grandmother's feet. It's magical to ask your mama how to make peach cobbler, like, and it's important because that then harnesses the ashe in your own body, which I think would lend itself to the other magical thing, which is intention. Our tongue is powerful and our speech is powerful, and it is ashe that creates and it manifests already because of the intention we carry out of our lineages. That magic is in our blood. So I don't have power just because I have power. I got power because Ethel May had power, who got power from from Ella Weaver, right? So these folks will see this stuff on plantations, on the Dinah plantation in Twiggs County, Georgia, which is why when I say something, it happens.
Right.
But it's important too to see that as valuable, to also hear and listen to our stories. Our stories are magical, and to harness those stories in ourselves, in our ears, in our spirits, to be passing them. That's magic too.
And I think it's important for us to recognize what you said, Reverend Estee, is that that this is being passed down through our ancestral lineage. Now we know what my sister Nozibele, she does hair products. I know that she got part of that from ancestrally from her grandmother. I know for myself, nobody ever taught me how to cook. I tell you, I'm in the kitchen and my ancestors talk to me. So there's a couple of things that happen. I tell my girls there's no arguing in the kitchen. We are not arguing over food. We're not doing that because you put that negative energy into the food. So you always, that you pray before you start cooking. And I know that like all of us, so most of us are here in the South. And then I know that I even did this when I was living in California on January 1st. What y'all gonna be eating?
Black eyed peas.
Black eyed peas and greens.
Y'all know y'all gonna have an extra helper as we don't get to 2020. So.
Well, we know Esther is gonna have a man in her house too, or she's gonna throw salt over her shoulder.
I'm glad today is long, so I don't know. I don't know how that my dog. I don't know how that's gonna work. I be like, I call on my daddy. The male ashe in my body. And
exactly. You got it's interpretation. I think that's where it goes.
I mean, there's so many things that we do in our everyday life and how we pass down recipes. You know, I'll stay on the food thing for the longest, but there are so many things that we don't need to dismiss. There be a specific way. You know, when you were growing up and somebody was teaching you how to drive or how to cook or how to put something away or how to clean something, there was a specific way. And sometimes they didn't necessarily explain to you what the science was behind it, but there was science behind those things. So I agree with you, Nozibele, when you said that we haven't lost it. It is part of our cultural everyday experience. And so sometimes because it is we dismiss it, even the way that we name our children.
Right. But then this is a good question because we've had this conversation about like things that might be superstition versus things that are knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, we had that kind of debate about whether you could buy somebody shoes for Christmas, and I was like, my grandmother said you ain't never buy somebody shoes because then they walk away in them, right? Like I don't know if that's what everybody says, but is that
superstition?
I've never bought anybody shoes, but like a sign.
But
The same with the watch. She said you can't buy somebody a watch because their time gonna run out. So I was like, well, no, well, I ain't gonna buy nobody a watch either. So,
but I think when you look at it, superstition, going back to Sterling Stuckey, superstition is rooted in traditional African beliefs. And the reason why we call superstition is that we have it separated. For example, the whole, let's say, sweeping people's feet, right? Yeah. That's a superstition. People say, don't sweep nobody's feet. I've heard everything from you can go to jail or you can die. You can sweep the person's out of your life. But that actually comes from a ritual from a Halu in Eve, a Babaluae in Yoruba, who's, told them it's the broom. And they sweep away all of these things. Right. And if you're a part of a ritual and you get hit by that broom by Babaluae, or you get hit by that broom by a Halu, that's not necessarily a good thing. So when we look at these superstitions, because of the way that we were our forced migration here, right? That those things have become separated. And by going back and studying and learning our traditional beliefs, so we'll find out superstition isn't really superstition, but it comes from rituals that we need to reconnect to.
And I think part of the thing that we have to consider is, what do we hang on to? And what do we release? I remember thinking, so every year, and I saw, I think it's Kina she was saying making sure that your house is clean and all your clothes are clean, before New Year's Day. And that has been a consistent ritual of mine. And this year I was like, this year was terrible. I ain't gonna worry about it. But then there was part of me that was like, wait.
You're like,
I don't know.
You asking for it. That's what
Wash everything. My grandmama used to be literally like, the devil got to get out of my house.
Got to get out.
You got to get out. This got to get, everything got to go.
Got to go.
And I think regardless of where people stand, I wanted us to have this conversation because all of us on this call have, been at fancy European institutions and, and worked at fancy European jobs. And so there's this idea that if you want to be quote unquote successful, that you have to comport yourself or move yourself in a way that is appropriate for the white gaze. And so what better way to be able to have this conversation than to have this conversation with brilliant minds, brilliant women that are not worried about the white gaze as we show up and have this conversation and speaking truth to power. And so I think that this has been a very powerful conversation to be able to hear from anthropology and history and social commentary in terms of journalism and literature and from a spiritual perspective. And so I want to thank each one of you, powerful women. If there's one quick thing, one sentence, because we are over time, if there's one sentence that you can leave this audience with, what would that one sentence be about this topic?
The importance of ancestors and the importance of the work we're doing right now, having these conversations, continuing the dialogue, and hopefully translating it into further action in our own personal, individual, but collective lives.
Ashe.
Never let anyone tell you who you are.
Mine would be, don't fear your magic, harness your magic. It's in your body. You already have it. You already possess it. How you call on it is not important. It's important that you do.
You see, they don't understand. They all brilliant. They don't understand one sentence. But anyway, go ahead.
That was clauses. That was commas in between.
There's a bunch of commas in there.
That was a hard pause. It was just a soft, just rest.
I said and.
It was one sentence and the explanation.
Read, study, learn, love, your history. I guess I was okay. Semicolon. You can understand Black people are magic. Amen.
Mine would be to know that your very existence is magical. Period. Point blank. So thank you for all of you showing up and sharing your energy today. I saw lots of comments in the chat. Help me please by thanking my guest, Nozibele Waithe, who is an anthropologist and also the owner of Grand Tressa. So like I told you, her hair looking fly today. So you can hit her at Grand Tressa, Reverend Estee, and she is a sexologist and a queer sexologist. Let me say that correctly. Thandisizwe Chimurenga, Thandisizwe, I'm gonna say it right. Chimurenga, who is a journalist, author, and social commentator, and Dr. CorrieClaiborne, who is a professor, associate professor of African American literature at Morehouse College. Thank you, ladies, for showing up today and having this conversation with me.
It was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.
And we will be here. We're gonna take a break, y'all. So I've been doing this since August. Every Friday since August. We're going to take a teeny tiny break just so, we got to, take care of ourselves, and I got to have some respite. So we will take a break, but then we will come back on Friday. So we will be back on January 8th. Please do me a favor, like this, share this, comment, just tell other people that we are having these conversations every Friday starting January 8th. I will have new people and we were having these conversations. So come on Facebook Live, have this conversation with me. I'm always interested in looking at Western psychology, African spirituality, culture, and just indigenous African healing practices specifically. And on Wednesdays at 3 p.m., I am on Instagram Live. So come and check me out in either space. Y'all take care.
Alrighty, peace.